What happens when a beloved music legend sits down for what should be a friendly chat on daytime television, only to find herself facing a barrage of personal attacks and condescending questions? In just 39 seconds, one heated comment from the host would ignite a firestorm that would see one of Britain's most treasured stars walk off the set in disgust, leaving the panel speechless and viewers at home absolutely stunned. It was supposed to be a celebration. Petula Clark, the iconic singer whose voice had soundtracked generations, was appearing on Loose Women to discuss her incredible career spanning over 7 decades. The studio audience was packed with fans eager to hear stories from the woman who gave us Downtown, Don't Sleep in the Subway, and countless other classics. Many in the audience had grown up listening to her music. Some had traveled for hours just to be there. The atmosphere was warm and welcoming as Petula took her seat on the famous panel sofa, her gracious smile radiating the same charm that had captivated audiences since the 1950s. She looked elegant in a simple but sophisticated outfit, her posture perfect, her demeanor relaxed and friendly. This should have been an easy interview, a delightful hour of reminiscence and celebration. Sitting across from her were the 4 panelists for that day's show. Denise Welch, the outspoken host known for her controversial opinions, sat in the center position. To her right was Nadia Sawalha, whose usually bubbly personality seemed slightly subdued. On the left sat Kay Adams, the Scottish presenter with her trademark professional demeanor, and beside her was Jane Moore, quietly observing as always. The cameras rolled, the audience applauded, and what should have been a delightful interview was about to take a very dark turn. Denise began the interview with what seemed like standard questions. She asked about Petula's latest projects, her time in Paris during the 60s, and her thoughts on modern music. Petula answered each question with grace and humility, sharing anecdotes that had the audience hanging on every word. She spoke about working with legendary producers like Tony Hatch, about the challenges of breaking into the American market, about performing for royalty and heads of state. She talked about her time living in France, raising her children while maintaining an international career, and the joy of still being able to perform for audiences who had loved her music for generations. She discussed the challenges of maintaining a career in an industry that often discarded older artists, but did so without bitterness, focusing instead on her gratitude for the opportunities she had been given. The conversation flowed naturally, and for the first 10 minutes, everything seemed perfectly pleasant. The audience was engaged, laughing at the right moments, applauding her stories. Even Denise seemed genuinely interested, nodding along and making appropriate comments. But then Denise's tone shifted. It was subtle at first, a slight edge creeping into her voice as she leaned forward with a question that felt less like genuine curiosity and more like an accusation disguised as concern. "Petula, you're 92 years old now," Denise said, her voice taking on a patronizing quality that immediately changed the energy in the room. "Don't you think it's time to just, relax? Enjoy retirement? I mean, why are you still trying to perform and record at your age?" The audience fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop in that studio. Nadia shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes widening in disbelief at what Denise had just said. Kay's eyebrows raised slightly, a look of concern crossing her face. Jane looked down at her notes, clearly uncomfortable with where this was heading. But Petula, ever the professional, maintained her composure. She had dealt with difficult interviewers before. She had faced tougher questions in her decades-long career. This was merely another challenge to navigate with grace. "Well, Denise," Petula replied calmly, "I don't see age as a barrier to doing what I love. Music has been my passion for my entire life, and I'm fortunate enough to still have the ability and the desire to create. Why should I stop doing something that brings me and others joy?" It was a perfectly reasonable response, delivered with the dignity you would expect from someone of Petula's stature. She had answered the question thoughtfully, calmly, and with just enough firmness to make her position clear, without being defensive. Any reasonable interviewer would have moved on to another topic, perhaps asking about her creative process or upcoming projects. But Denise wasn't satisfied. She pressed on, her questions becoming more pointed and increasingly personal. There was a shift in her body language, too. She leaned forward aggressively, her tone becoming sharper with each word. "But surely," Denise continued, waving her hand dismissively, "you must realize that people your age should be taking it easy. I mean, what are you really proving by still trying to be relevant? The music industry has moved on, hasn't it?" The condescension was unmistakable now. Petula's smile tightened slightly, but she maintained her grace under pressure. "I'm not trying to prove anything to anyone," Petula said, her voice still steady, but with a hint of steel entering it. "I perform because I want to, not because I need validation from others. And I'd like to think that art and creativity don't come with an expiration date." Nadia tried to step in, clearly sensing the tension building. "I think what's wonderful is that you're still so passionate about your work, Petula. It's truly inspiring." But Denise cut her off with a sharp look. "I'm just being honest here. I think we all need to be realistic about our limitations as we get older. I mean, Petula, you can't possibly hit the same notes you could 50 years. Ago, isn't it a bit embarrassing to try?" A collective gasp went through the studio audience. Kay's mouth fell open. Jane looked genuinely shocked. Even the camera operators seemed to pause for a moment, as if they couldn't believe what they'd just heard. The audacity of the question, the sheer disrespect embedded in every word, hung in the air like a thundercloud. Petula's expression changed. The polite smile vanished, replaced by a look of dignified indignation. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but carried the weight of someone who had endured decades in an industry that often tried to diminish women, especially older women. "Embarrassing?" Petula repeated slowly, her voice taking on an edge that made everyone sit up straighter. "I've performed for presidents and prime ministers. I've sold over 70 million records worldwide. I've had #1 hits in multiple countries across multiple decades. I've won 2 Grammy Awards. I've been made a Commander of the Order of the British Empire by the Queen herself. I've performed in packed concert halls from London to Los Angeles, from Paris to Sydney. I've worked with some of the greatest musicians and producers this industry has ever known. And you're asking me if I find it embarrassing to continue doing what I've done successfully for longer than you've been alive. Embarrassing would be sitting here and accepting your premise that age somehow disqualifies talent or passion or the right to do what one loves." The audience erupted in spontaneous applause. Denise's face flushed, clearly not expecting such a strong response. She tried to backtrack, her voice taking on a defensive tone. "I didn't mean it like that," Denise stammered. "I'm just saying that maybe it's time to accept that your best years are behind you. That's not an insult. It's just reality." Kay finally found her voice, and when she spoke, there was steel in her tone. "Denise, I think you're being incredibly rude. This isn't tough questioning. This is just being nasty. Petula is a legend, and she deserves respect. What you're doing right now is disgraceful." "Oh, here we go," Denise said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Everyone's so sensitive. I'm asking questions that half our viewers are probably wondering about. When is it appropriate to step back? When does ambition become something else?" Denise whipped around to face Kay, her defensiveness turning into aggression. "Oh, so now I'm the bad guy for asking honest questions? This is what we do on this show. We have real conversations. Maybe if you all weren't so busy worshiping every celebrity who walks through that door, we could have some actual authenticity here." The tension was now palpable. Jane Moore, usually quiet during conflicts, spoke up with barely contained frustration. "There's a difference between honest conversation and being disrespectful. You've crossed a line." Denise scoffed. "Oh, please, Jane. Don't act like you're suddenly the moral authority here. I'm asking questions that our viewers are probably thinking. Not everyone is content to sit here and pretend that aging doesn't come with realities that we need to face. Petula had been sitting quietly during this exchange, her hands folded in her lap, watching the panel argue amongst themselves. When she finally spoke again, her voice cut through the chaos with quiet authority. "I've been in this business since I was 9 years old," Petula said, her voice steady and clear. "I've faced critics, doubters, and people who thought they knew better than me about my own life and career. I've been told I was too young, too old, too this, too that. I've been underestimated and dismissed more times than I can count. But I've never, in all my years, sat across from someone who was supposed to be a professional interviewer and been treated with such blatant disrespect." Denise opened her mouth to respond, but Petula held up a hand, silencing her. "Let me finish," Petula continued, her tone brooking no argument. "You invited me here today. I didn't ask to come on your show. I agreed to appear because I thought it would be a pleasant conversation with fellow women about my life and career. Instead, I've been subjected to ageist remarks, condescending questions, and what can only be described as a deliberate attempt to humiliate me." Nadia nodded vigorously. "You're absolutely right, Petula. This has been completely out of order." But Denise's ego wouldn't allow her to back down. Her face reddened further as she leaned forward aggressively. "Oh, come on. You're being dramatic. I asked you some straightforward questions about your age and your career. If you can't handle a little bit of real talk, then maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews at all." That was the final straw. The room seemed to hold its breath as Petula slowly stood up from the sofa. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, dignified. She removed her microphone with care, her hands steady despite the emotion that must have been coursing through her. The clip pack came off her belt. She placed both items carefully on the coffee table in front of her. Every eye in the studio was fixed on her. The camera operators zoomed in, capturing every moment. The producers in the control room were frantically signaling to the floor manager, unsure how to handle what was unfolding. Should they cut to commercial? Should they let it play out? This had never happened before. Guests didn't just walk off loose women, but then again, guests were usually treated with basic respect. "Real talk," Petula said, her voice low, but carrying across the entire studio with the power of decades of vocal training and stage presence. "Let me give you some real talk, Denise. You're a bully. You hide behind the excuse of honest conversation and authentic dialogue to justify saying cruel and hurtful things to people who come on this show in good faith. You invite guests here, people who have accomplished extraordinary things, who have stories worth hearing, experiences worth sharing, and then you tear them down. You make them defend their very existence. You clearly have some deep-seated issues with aging and relevance that you're projecting onto me, but I refuse to be your punching bag. I refuse to sit here and validate your need to feel superior by making me feel small." Denise's face went from red to nearly purple. "How dare you? You have no right to speak to me like that. This is my show." "Actually, Denise, it's not your show. It's called Loose Women, not the Denise Welch Show. And these women," she gestured to Nadia, Kay, and Jane, "they clearly understand what you don't. That respect and decency aren't optional just because you have a microphone and a camera pointed at you. That having a platform comes with responsibility. That being controversial is not the same as being insightful. That challenging your guests should come from a place of genuine curiosity, not from a desire to demean them. They understand that this show is supposed to be about women supporting women, not tearing each other down for ratings." Kay stood up as well, moving toward Petula. "Petula, I'm so sorry. You don't deserve this treatment. Please know that not all of us feel the way Denise does." Jane also rose from her seat. "Absolutely. This has been disgraceful. Nadia was already on her feet, tears in her eyes. I'm mortified that this happened. You came here as our guest, and you've been treated appallingly. Denise, realizing she was now isolated, tried to regain control. This is ridiculous. Sit down, all of you. We're in the middle of a live show. But no one was listening to her anymore. Petula placed a gentle hand on Kay's arm. Thank you, my dear. I appreciate your kindness, but I think it's best if I leave now. Denise stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Fine. Walk off then. Show everyone what a diva you really are. I was trying to have an honest conversation, and you can't handle it. Petula turned back to face Denise one final time. The entire studio was silent. Even the audience seemed to be holding their breath. When Petula spoke, every word landed with the weight of decades of experience and dignity. An honest conversation requires mutual respect, Denise. Something you clearly don't understand. I've performed for millions of people around the world. I've been honored by the Queen. I've had a career that most people can only dream of. And I've done it all while maintaining my integrity and treating people with kindness. Can you say the same? Denise sputtered, searching for a comeback, but finding none. Her face was a mask of fury and embarrassment as she realized that every camera in the studio had captured her behavior. Every microphone had recorded her words. The other panelists were standing with the guest against her. The audience was clearly on Petula's side. She had lost, and she knew it. You know what your problem is, Denise. Petula continued, her voice calm but firm. You think that being provocative is the same as being intelligent. You think that being rude is the same as being honest. You think that tearing others down somehow builds you up. But it doesn't. It just makes you small. The audience erupted into thunderous applause. People were on their feet, cheering for Petula. Denise looked around the studio wildly, as if searching for someone, anyone, who would take her side. But she was alone in her position. This is unbelievable, Denise shouted over the applause. I'm the host of this show. I set the tone here. You can't just walk in and tell me how to do my job. Petula shook her head slowly. I'm not telling you how to do your job, Denise. I'm telling you that you're not doing it well. There's a difference. With that, Petula turned and walked toward the exit. Kay, Jane, and Nadia all reached out to touch her arm or shoulder as she passed, offering quiet words of support and apology. The camera followed her elegant exit, capturing the straight back, the held head, the unmistakable dignity of someone who knew their worth and refused to be diminished. Behind her, chaos erupted on the panel. Nadia turned on Denise immediately. How could you do that? How could you treat a guest like that? She's a legend, and you just humiliated her on live television. I was doing my job, Denise snapped back, asking tough questions. That's what I'm here for. Jane shook her head in disgust. Tough questions? You were being nasty. There's a difference between challenging someone and attacking them. You attacked her. Kay's voice was ice cold. You know what the worst part is, Denise? You don't even see what you did wrong. You actually think you were in the right. Denise looked around at her fellow panelists, her expression a mixture of defiance and growing uncertainty. You're all overreacting. This is blown completely out of proportion. Nadia pointed toward the door where Petula had exited. A woman who has achieved more in her career than any of us could ever hope to walk off this set because of how you treated her. How is that an overreaction? The floor manager was frantically gesturing to the control room, trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. The producers were likely panicking, knowing that this moment would be replayed, discussed, and dissected for weeks to come. The audience sat in stunned silence, having witnessed something they had never expected to see on a daytime talk show. Denise threw her hands up in frustration. Fine. If everyone wants to blame me, fine. But I stand by what I said. Sometimes people need to hear the truth, even if it's uncomfortable. Kay leaned forward, her voice dripping with contempt. The truth? The truth is that Petula Clark is a beloved icon who has earned the right to do whatever she wants with her career. The truth is that you were rude, disrespectful, and completely out of line. The truth is that you just embarrassed yourself and this show on live television. Jane nodded in agreement. And the truth is that if anyone should be considering their relevance and whether they should still be doing this job, it's you, not Petula Clark. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Denise's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Shock, anger, hurt, and finally a desperate attempt at righteous indignation. "You can all think what you want," Denise said, her voice shaking slightly. "But I'm not going to apologize for being real. This panel is supposed to be about honest women having honest conversations. If that makes me the villain in your eyes, so be it." Nadia stood up, tears still streaming down her face. "You want to know what's real, Denise? What's real is that we just lost a guest who should have been celebrating her incredible life and career. What's real is that thousands of people watching at home just saw you bully someone who deserves nothing but respect. What's real is that you've damaged this show's reputation and hurt someone who did nothing to deserve it." The control room finally made a decision. The floor manager signaled to the cameras to cut away. The show went to a commercial break, leaving the panel in disarray. But the damage was done. The moment had been captured. The confrontation had played out for all to see. In the green room, Petula was being consoled by production assistants and makeup artists, all of whom were apologizing profusely. One young assistant, no more than 25 years old, looked at Petula with tears in her eyes. Her mascara had started to run, and she kept dabbing at her face with a tissue. "Miss Clark," the assistant said quietly, her voice shaking with emotion, "I just want you to know that what you said out there was incredible. The way you stood up for yourself, the way you put her in her place with such grace and dignity. You didn't lose your temper. You didn't stoop to her level. You just spoke the truth with such power. You're my hero. My grandmother loves your music, and she's going to be so proud when I tell her I met you, even under these circumstances." Petula smiled warmly at the young woman. "Thank you, dear. That's very kind of you to say." Another crew member, an older man who had worked in television for decades, shook his head in disbelief. "In all my years in this business, I've never seen anything like that. The way you handled yourself out there, Miss Clark. Pure class." Back on set, the tension remained thick even during the commercial break. Denise sat rigid in her chair, arms crossed defensively. Kay, Jane, and Nadia had moved slightly away from her, creating physical distance that matched the emotional chasm that had opened up. A producer rushed onto the set, speaking urgently to the panel. "Ladies, we need to address this when we come back. Denise, you need to apologize." Denise's head whipped around. "Apologize? For what?" "For doing my job." The producer's expression was grim. "For making a guest walk off the show. For the way you spoke to her. For creating a situation that we're going to be dealing with for weeks. Yes, Denise, you need to apologize." Kay spoke up. "Even if you don't think you did anything wrong, Denise, at the very least, you need to acknowledge that Petula was hurt by your comments. You need to show some empathy." Denise's jaw clenched. "I'll address it, but I'm not going to grovel." Jane let out a bitter laugh. "Of course you won't. God forbid you actually take responsibility for your actions." The floor manager counted them back in. The cameras went live again. The audience, still buzzing from what they had witnessed, fell silent as the red lights on the cameras illuminated. Denise took a deep breath and looked directly into the camera, composing herself into what she clearly hoped would appear as a sincere expression. "As you just saw, our guest Petula Clark has left the show. I want to address what happened here today. My questions during this interview were perhaps more direct than intended, and if Miss Clark felt disrespected by anything I said, that was certainly not my aim. I was simply trying to have an honest conversation about the realities of aging in the entertainment industry. It was the weakest apology imaginable. No real acknowledgement of wrongdoing. No genuine remorse. No acceptance of responsibility. Just careful corporate speak designed to protect herself while offering the bare minimum. She had managed to avoid actually saying the words, "I'm sorry." She had framed her behavior as merely being direct rather than cruel, and she had tried to intellectualize what was simply rudeness. Nadia couldn't let it stand. "Denise, I think we need to be more clear here. You didn't just ask direct questions. You made ageist comments. You questioned whether someone with Petula's incredible legacy should even still be performing. You implied she was embarrassing herself. That's not direct questioning. That's being cruel." The audience applauded Nadia's words. Denise's face flushed again, but before she could respond, Kay jumped in. "And I think we all need to recognize," Kay said firmly, "that what happened today was completely unacceptable. Petula Clark is a treasure. She's someone who has given joy to millions of people over 7 decades. She came here as our guest, and she was treated appallingly. On behalf of this show and this panel, I want to say to Petula, wherever you are watching, we are deeply sorry." Jane nodded emphatically. "Absolutely. Petula, if you're watching, please know that your grace and dignity in the face of such rudeness was extraordinary. You showed us all what true class looks like." Denise sat stiffly, her body language screaming defensiveness and resentment. But she was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and increasingly isolated. The show limped through the rest of the hour, with the 3 remaining panelists doing their best to salvage what had become a disaster. Throughout it all, the image that viewers couldn't shake was that final moment. Petula Clark, standing tall, removing her microphone, and delivering a masterclass in dignity and self-respect. She had walked onto that set as a guest and left as a symbol of strength. She had been attacked and had defended herself with words that cut deeper than any insult. She had shown that grace under pressure isn't about staying quiet in the face of disrespect. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. What should have been a celebration of an incredible life and career had instead become a stark reminder of the ageism that still permeates our culture, even on shows that claim to empower women. Denise Welch had intended to be provocative, to generate discussion, to create a moment. She had succeeded, but not in the way she had hoped. Instead of establishing herself as a fearless interviewer, willing to ask tough questions, she had revealed herself as someone who confuses cruelty with courage, and who mistakes belittling others for bold conversation. And Petula Clark, who had simply wanted to share stories from her remarkable journey, had instead given one of the most powerful performances of her career. Not singing a single note, not performing a choreographed routine, just being herself, standing up for her dignity, speaking truth to power, and walking away with her head held high. She had shown that true strength isn't about shouting the loudest or being the most aggressive. It's about knowing your worth, standing your ground, and refusing to let anyone make you feel less than you are. In that moment, she had taught a masterclass, not just in how to handle disrespect, but in how to be a human being with integrity and grace. In 39 seconds, with a single dismissive question about age and relevance, Denise Welch had set in motion a chain of events that would define that episode, that week, and perhaps her tenure on the show. She had picked the wrong person to underestimate. She had challenged someone whose strength had been forged through decades of facing down critics and overcoming obstacles. And she had lost, spectacularly and publicly, because she had forgotten the most basic rule of interviewing: respect your guest. Without that, you have nothing.